Hey everybody, and welcome back to another max velocity weather forecast. And in today's forecast, we'll be breaking down a massive storm that'll bring a severe weather outbreak today to the Great Plains, along with the threat for a massive winter storm as we go into tomorrow that could bring both heavy snow and ice accumulation. I'll give you the latest breakdown on both of these situations and more in this forecast. Let's first begin with what's happening across the United States today, beginning with the western half of the United States, which is actually where our low pressure system is currently located. It doesn't look like the most organized low pressure system that you've ever seen, but once this goes over the Rocky Mountains and into the Central Plains, this thing will rapidly intensify, bringing the threat for severe weather later today for those in the southern and central plains, and eventually it'll move into the Midwest and Northeast, where it'll become a winter storm, bringing heavy snowfall along with the threat for some ice accumulation again, sort of like last week. But luckily this will not be nearly as bad, but it's definitely still something to be very mindful of. So let me take you through the precipitation over the next several days on our future radar to give you an idea of what we're actually talking about here. So going into later this evening, that is when severe weather will develop in the central and southern plains. I'll have a more detailed breakdown on this here in just a moment, so stay tuned. Once we go throughout Monday morning, that is when that low pressure system is fairly strong, 985 millibars, pretty strong low pressure system for sure here. This will bring the threat though for some snow and ice as well back over into areas like Wisconsin, Minnesota, and as well as Michigan. And once we go throughout Monday night into Tuesday morning, look at this. A low pressure system will develop off the coast of New Jersey. We'll also have another low pressure system centered over near areas east of Michigan, and there'll be another one all the way back up here to the north in Canada. It is a trio of low pressure systems that'll be bringing snow and as well as the potential again for some freezing rain. Very impressive system. Once we go throughout Tuesday evening, that is when snow will still continue, but by Wednesday morning that system moves out, and our next big storm will be late next week, which will be a big severe weather event. I'll talk about more on that in our next forecast. But first, let's begin with the severe weather threat for today. There is a moderate threat of severe weather for those in Oklahoma and even back into north central Texas. One thing I want to point out is that this area is massive. It extends all the way back into Illinois. So we are talking about a massive area for severe weather today. But our main focus with any of the severe weather today will be in Oklahoma, southeast Kansas, western Missouri, and as well as northwestern Arkansas, and even parts of Texas as well have the threat for upwards of 90-mile-per-hour damaging winds, hail up to the size of hen eggs, and as well as the threat for tornadoes, which one may be strong, and I'll show you more on that here in just a moment. But our main concerned area for this afternoon and evening will be in north central Texas, back through areas even in central Oklahoma. That does now include Oklahoma City. Main concern again will be damaging winds without a doubt today, because this will be a linear line of storms that'll develop, which will be composed of primarily a damaging wind threat, but a few tornadoes along with the threat for some large hail's not out of the question. And look at this, by the way, there is a huge hatched area. This represents a 10% chance within a 25-mile radius of damaging winds over 70 miles per hour. So this will be an area to watch for very closely for some very significant severe weather later today and into tonight. Also, the tornado threat, it is not very large, but there is definitely a threat for tornadoes. It's low overall. It would be embedded with that line of storms. The main focused area though for any strong tornado activity, which there be maybe one, would be back down in southwestern Oklahoma near Childress, Texas. That is where the Storm Prediction Center has outlined for the threat of maybe an isolated strong tornado. Otherwise, there is a 5% probability back through southern Kansas and even back into north central Texas, and then back through western Missouri, there is a very low chance for maybe an isolated brief or weak tornado. With this setup, there is not that much instability, and what that basically means is that there's not a whole lot of sunlight today due to the fact there's been so much cloud cover in the southern plains over the past 24 to 48 hours. So the instability values will not be that high due to the fact there will not be much sunshine. Thank the clouds, by the way, because that'll help to limit the severe weather potential a little bit and keep this more of a linear line of storms in comparison to discrete supercells. And discrete supercells would be a much bigger problem in this sort of setup, but overall instability between 500 to 1,000 joules per kilogram. There will not be much of any instability left after midnight, which means that severe weather threat after midnight tonight will decrease pretty rapidly, and I'll show you more on that here in just a moment. Tornado threat, again, I already kind of mentioned this, but this is the tornado parameter. Gives you an idea of where that greatest tornado tornado threat will be right around 6 to 7 o'clock. This is where the greatest tornado threat will lie. Basically in western Oklahoma is the main region that we're watching for a tornado threat, but there still will be a chance for maybe an isolated tornado or two in that line of storms. Even throughout the evening and closer to the overnight hours, that is when there might be just enough rotation in the lower levels to produce maybe a low-end tornado threat. In terms of the timing for this evening, storms will begin to fire up around 4 to 5 o'clock. Main threat with these initial storms will be large hail and downburst winds upwards of 60 to 70 miles per hour. This line becomes much more strong and organized by around 7 o'clock tonight near Elk City in western Oklahoma. Eventually by 8 to 9 o'clock, that line will really be pronounced by then. We'll be watching for a pretty significant damaging wind threat up and down anywhere from Wichita Falls back through southern Kansas. Oklahoma City will start to see these storms right around 9 to 10 o'clock. They will cross over Interstate 35 and eventually going closer to around midnight or so. That is when that line of storms will move through eastern Oklahoma and back into western Missouri. By that point, this line will be weakening pretty quickly due to the fact the instability will start to become very limited across this region. But you may notice back over in areas like Missouri, there will still be a line of storms from Kansas City back through areas near Springdale, Arkansas. But once we go into the overnight hours, that line of storms still does exist, but the significant damaging wind threat over 70 miles per hour will at this point pretty much be done. 60-mile-per-hour damaging winds may occur even through St. Louis as we go into tomorrow morning and eventually going closer to 7 a.m. on Monday. There is still a threat for maybe a couple of those storms to be severe, but the threat overall will definitely decrease as that line moves off to the east. Now, the winter storm, I want to really talk about this because it will be a pretty big event that not too many people have talked about recently, and that is the winter storm that could very well go in the Midwest. It all begins tomorrow morning where there will be a snow and freezing rain region back into northern Wisconsin. This will bring a pretty big threat for maybe some ice accumulation on the roadways. Even through Monday afternoon and evening, there will still be some snow out there across the Midwest near Wisconsin. Eventually going into Tuesday morning, though, this will quickly move off to the east. So it's really going to be a pretty quick event. Really just during the daytime hours on Monday is when this winter storm will make some of the greater impacts here to the Midwest. In terms of snowfall accumulation, we are watching primarily for northern Wisconsin as well as parts of Michigan for the greatest snowfall accumulation. Some areas could get maybe upwards of 3 to 6 inches of snow, as well as near Green Bay, there's a threat for maybe 3 to 6 inches of snow there. Upper Michigan Peninsula, definitely going to be in the range most likely of at least 2 to 4 inches, but some areas may get closer to 6 to 7 inches of snow when this is all said and done. In terms of ice accumulation, there will be a couple of areas to watch for some glaze of ice, maybe upwards of maybe a 20th of an inch of ice back over in central Michigan. So nothing in comparison to our previous ice storm that just happened last week. Back through areas in Minnesota as well as Wisconsin, there may be a chance for up to a quarter of an inch of ice, and this will definitely not be something that will cause widespread power outages. However, there might at least be some isolated power outages with that sort of ice accumulation. Back through the Northeast, again, this will be the area that we see some snowfall primarily Tuesday morning. Throughout the day Tuesday and even into Wednesday morning, there will be some light to moderate snow across the region. It will pretty much be consistent, so there will be some pretty decent snowfall totals across this area. Some areas could actually get upwards of 4 to 8 inches. That's the current forecast for most of New England. And even back through parts of New York, those areas could also see upwards of 8 inches of snow as well. This forecast is brought to you by Platinum Contracting.